Understanding why a behavior occurs often suggests how it can be changed for the better. Implementing interventions without functional assessment can be harmful. So if you don't have any data um, and you're just taking a guess at like, oh, this intervention might work, if you're not basing that on FBA, you might get lucky. More likely, though, you're probably not going to get lucky and you'll be doing your client some harm by making a recommendation that's not based on a functional assessment. When FBAs are completed, clients are more likely, or staff or caregivers, schools, parents are more likely to implement reinforcement contingencies, and clients are more likely to have better outcomes and be in the least restrictive environment and have the least restrictive intervention. So basically, without FBAs, we're just basically taking a stab in the dark. And with FBAs, then we can have better treatment, better outcomes. Functions of behavior. Positive reinforcement. We've got attention, adding intention to the environment. Tangibles, getting preferred items. Automatic positive reinforcement. Escape and avoidance. Automatic negative reinforcement. Different types of functional assessment. There's indirect assessment, descriptive assessments, functional analysis, and I want to talk a little bit about some new research that Hanley's doing on practical functional assessment. So functional analysis is when you have control of the environment and you systematically change the variables in order to determine the cause of the problem behavior. So you have a controlled setting. If you're able to change the antecedent conditions, you're able to change the consequence conditions, and you're able to control for each function. So you would do one condition where you're just removing all the items, but you're giving a lot of attention. You do another condition where they don't have access to anything, and you'll see if they engage any behavior if it's automatically the function. Then you have another condition where you bring in a whole bunch of fun stuff, and you see if the behavior happens. And you change the you control for all these things and then graph the data that you're looking at, and it'll pinpoint the function. The advantages to this is that it's standardized and you're able to control for everything. And that gives you pretty strong conclusions as to what the function of the behavior is. The disadvantages are that it may lead to more undesirable behavior, putting someone possibly in a strange room with a whole bunch of different stuff. You might be reinforcing problem behavior. Strictly speaking, this should be done. You're doing all four of them. It's difficult to implement, and contrived contingencies may not match the natural environment contingencies. So for example, if we are at a clinic setting or an inpatient setting, we have an assessment room, we'll have a whole bunch of stuff, but it might not be the same thing that's going on at home or another setting where those behaviors are occurring. So we do get very good data, and it's very likely going to be able to point us in the right direction of the function, but it's not certain. Descriptive functional behavior assessment is direct observation of behavior in naturally occurring conditions. So this is just observing someone in the natural environment and taking data on what's happening. The data collection is done through antecedent behavior consequence data, can be done through scatter plot data. If you give someone a scatter plot and then you see like, okay, at noon, we're having a lot of these behaviors, then you come in at noon and you just sit back in the corner and observe and record the antecedents, record the behaviors, record what happens after the behaviors, and take that information and collect that information and see if that points to a function of behavior. For example, so you're just observing, and let's say you have it's lunchtime and the client is given a sandwich and they want chicken nuggets. They engage in a tantrum behavior and then they end up getting chicken nuggets. Then that data would pretty strongly point to the function of tangible, getting a preferred item, chicken nuggets instead of a sandwich. The advantages are that it's likely to provide useful information on the function. It's likely to provide specific details and treatment recommendations. So based on that situation, we can go straight to, okay, we need to work on flexibility with meals, and we know the specific antecedents, and we can make specific treatment recommendations as far to, just for that example, as far as, okay, here's how we're gonna reduce tantrum behaviors for getting chicken nuggets. Here's how we're gonna increase compliance to eating other non-preferred foods. Another advantage is that it doesn't disrupt the client's routine. So you can just go in and just be a fly on the wall. You're not changing anything. You're just observing and taking data. The disadvantages are that it's correlation does not equal causation. Just because you're seeing something happen, it doesn't mean that that's the function of the behavior. It could be something completely different that's causing the function of that behavior. Since you're not doing an experimental control like the functional analysis, you don't know for sure. But the more data that you can collect, the more sure that you can be. And another disadvantage is that the conditions and the target behavior may not occur. Maybe you come in and they eat the sandwich and they're not hungry for chicken nuggets today, and you're not able to get the data that you need to determine the function. Behavioral interview is just is an indirect assessment. The client might not even be present, and you're interviewing a caregiver or another stakeholder. So there's different behavior rating scales that you can use, or you can use a less structured interview. Basically where you just go through and you're like, okay, tell me about the behaviors that you're concerned about. When do they happen? What's most likely to occur before it happens? What's the most likely thing that will happen after? Can you give me an example? Advantages, they can provide useful information in guiding a more objective assessment. They're very convenient to implement. If a kid's at school, then you can meet with a parent and get information about what's going on with the target behaviors. The disadvantages, of course, it's not a direct observation. It's not direct data. It's all secondhand. It's subjective and it might not be accurate. This is a fast functional assessment screening tool. And it's just an example of one way to get indirect data. I listed this one because some insurances that we work with require us to complete this for problem behaviors. And you do a different one for each problem behavior because it might be controlled by a different function. So you go through and you ask all those questions, and then it's got on the left side, it's more of an informal interview. Tell me about the behavior. Is it aggression? Okay. How often does it happen? Times and settings that it happens, before and after. And then the right side is specific questions with yes, no. And then at the bottom, there's coding. Each question asks about a different function. So the first question, does the problem behavior occur when the person is not receiving attention or when caregivers are paying attention to someone else? If the answer is yes, then could be that the behavior of concern has an attention component to it. If the answer is no, then it's less likely to have an attention. There's 4 questions for each one. You score them up and it'll give you an idea about the function. Of course, this is helpful information, but it's not necessarily like, okay, I did the fast and now I'm certain that this behavior is controlled by this function. I want to talk about practical functional assessment and some work that Greg Hanley's doing. I have to say that I'm familiar with his work, but I haven't been thoroughly trained on it. But it is really interesting. Basically, they're saying, like, why go through all this process? We only care about this individual's behavior and what's going on with this individual. Why should we do a functional assessment, functional analysis, and do all these 4 different variables? Why that has side effects that could increase behavior. Basically, they want to figure out the fastest way that they can get in and start doing an intervention. And the goal of doing this is basically within an hour, within the first session, you do a structured interview, and then that gives you an idea for the function. And then you do an AB design, and then move right into treatment. So within the first hour of meeting the client, you've done a full assessment, and you've actually started implementing interventions. So it's the first part, basically like a half an hour is an open interview. It's structured, and then that open interview will point towards a function, and it'll, if you're like, okay, after the interview, you get something like they're engaging in this behavior in order to get attention. Then you're going to have a control condition and you're going to have an attention condition. And what they do is 5 minutes, you'll do a control, 5 minutes, you'll do an attention, 5 minutes, you'll do a control, 5 minutes, you'll do an attention. And then, so it's within 20 minutes, you've got an AB design. And if the data from your AB design points to attention being the function, then you'll start implementing an intervention that targets that function. If you're doing the actual assessment, and you're doing the test conditions and it's not the right function, then you go back at your interview and you look, okay, what's that? We throw that hypothesis out. Let's move on to our next hypothesis, start testing, condition test, condition test. And if the data points to that being the function, then you move on to the intervention. The advantages of this is that you get immediate data on your proposed function versus the control within the first session. You get rapid implementation of the interventions for severe problem behavior. You do all the assessment and intervention in one session. Disadvantages are, you're guessing, not all functions are assessed. And there's no observation under natural contingencies. This is typically done in a more controlled environment. And this is more typically targeting more severe problem behavior that can be worked on in more like an outpatient or partial hospitalization style setting. And here is an example of the open-ended functional assessment interview that they use. They ask all of these questions in this specific order. And then there's a way to interpret this that points to an assessment. And then based on that, then there's a specific intervention that they use. So if you have a chance to do training with Hanley, I would recommend it. And he also has all his stuff for free. Practicalfunctionalassessment.com. And this is something that's new just within the last couple of years, doing a lot of research on it. And we'll probably be seeing a lot more of this in the future. Any questions so far? Okay. So when we're conducting an FBA, generally we want to begin with an indirect assessment. We want to do an interview, ask some questions, get a general idea of what's going on, and then come up with a plan on specifically how to do then the rest of the assessments. So begin with a direct assessment. Typically for us, that would mean going out to the parents, meeting the client for the first time, meeting the parents, doing some kind of interview or other indirect assessment potentially doing a fast or another behavior scale. And then let's say if parent says, yeah, at home we don't really see a lot of behaviors. Sometimes we see it at homework time, but really he has a lot of problem behaviors at school, and it's this, this, and this. So then you'll set up your next assessment to go out and do a direct observation in the setting that you were most likely to see that problem behavior. A lot of the time for us, we can, between an indirect assessment and a direct observation, if everything's lining up and we have all the information that we need, we can stop there. If we don't have all the information that we need, then we keep going. And then we have to do more of a functional analysis and see if we can test for a hypothesis. At any point in this step, generally it goes indirect assessment, direct observation, functional analysis. At any point, if we can operationalize the target behavior, formulate and test a hypothesis, and then reformulate and test, retest the hypothesis if we need to. And once we have a hypothesis and we're certain that we know the function of the behavior, we have all the information that we need, then we can write the treatment plan. When we have a hypothesis, we need to, I call it the magic sentence. It's the hypothesis statement. It's when, and then we put in the antecedent conditions. The client will add in the behaviors of concern in order to the function of the behavior. For example, when denied access to preferred items and activities, Johnny will engage in aggression by hitting and biting in order to gain access to preferred items. If we're doing the FBA, if this is the behavior that's the behavior of the concern, if we're doing the indirect assessment and mom's like, yeah, Johnny, whenever he doesn't get his way, he starts hitting and biting. And then we just give him what we want. And then you observe, and sure enough, whenever Johnny doesn't get his way, whenever he's told no, whenever he's denied access, and he hits and bites, and then you see people giving him all the stuff that he wants. Then at that point, you're probably pretty sure that you have a good hypothesis and that you're onto something with the function of behavior. If anything doesn't line up, then you need to go on and you need to more directly change what's going on and see if you can get more information by doing more of a functional analysis. Other considerations, you have to operationally define the behaviors of concern. That won't be done for you. You're going to have to get that idea from the gleaning all that information from the when you're doing the interview, when you're reading reports, when you're observing, and it might not line up. Everyone might say that someone's doing this or doing that, and you go out and observe, and you're like, okay, this is what it actually looks like. And then you operationally define that behavior and start taking data on it. You want to target your observations for when the behavior is most likely to occur. So if you know that the behavior is most likely to occur at noon, you don't want to observe them at 5 o'clock. If oftentimes you'll get reports, I know it seems like such a long time ago that school was in session, but if you have problem behaviors at school, a lot of times the worst time it's going to be is Monday mornings. After you get that weekend and the kid's back in school and they have a whole week of demands ahead of them, that's when you get that spike in behavior. So that's if that's the case, if that's what the reports are pointing to, then that's when you want to go out and observe. You want to observe as many settings and times as possible. Basically, you want to get as much information, especially if we're relying on more observational assessments. We want to get as much ABC data as possible across different people, across different times, across different places. That'll also give us ideas about the function, but it'll also give us more ideas about the intervention. You want to make sure that you are aware of observer effects, especially if you're doing observational assessment. You want to be a fly on the wall as much as possible at first. You don't want to run in and start changing up the environment, then you're not going to get an accurate picture. So this is you're able to do this more at, say, like school. If you're going in to observe problem behavior, you want to discreetly walk in, go and sit in the back of the class and start taking data. You don't want to walk up and be like, "Hi, my name's Mr. Chris. I'm going to be observing and see if you're um, going to do everything the teacher asks you to do today." If you do that, you're probably changing what's actually going to happen, one way or the other. And it's less likely that you're going to get an observation of what everyone actually reports. More often than not, someone's either going to tell you, "Oh, they're never like this," and it's either the kids just flipping out when they don't normally do it. Because there's something unusual, strangers there, and they're just off, and they're more likely to engage in problem behavior when they normally don't. Or the other, on the flip side of that, I've heard it so many times that, like, wow, he's never sat down and done this before. He's only doing it because you're here. And I'm like, great, I've got the easiest job in the world. All I have to do is come sit here in the back of the classroom, and the kid magically starts complying. You'll normally hear one of those two things. And you just have to continue the assessment, gather all the information that you can, make a determination. Um, Doing an FBA, you can only report what you observe. Sometimes it'll happen that behaviors will be reported, especially if you have someone that engages in severe tantrum behavior or something, or biting or something, but it only happens a couple times a week. If you're only coming out for a little bit of time, the odds aren't going to be very good that you're going to hit that time. So sometimes you do have to add information by report, but make sure that you clearly specify that it's by report. You can't just take interview information and write an FBA based on that. So you might say something like, client was observed to do this, and by report, this also happens. If you're doing an FBA for an educational setting, if you're working for a district, you have to do 3 observations. And ideally, you want to do a phase change line. If you're doing an educational FBA, you're only focusing on that problem behavior, and you're able to do 3 full observations, just observing and just targeting whatever the problem behavior of concern is. So you might get a report that someone is engaging in tantrum behavior, and you go out and you do 3 observations that are geared just towards that tantrum behavior. And ideally, after an observation or 2, you'll get a good idea of the function, and you'll make some recommendations, and you're able to put in a phase change line. And then when you report your information at an IEP meeting, then you can say, I observed 3 times. My hypothesis was this, we put in this intervention and we saw this change. If you're in, and this is only if you're working, this information here is geared towards if you're working for a district, specifically on the educational side of things. Even though we are in schools, we're not on the educational side of things. This is special education law here. And then if you have 3 observations and 2 observations baseline, 1 observation of after an intervention has been implemented, then IEP team is much more likely to listen to what you have to say. If you can say, like, we did this and this is the effect that it had. Considerations for private insurance, what we do. Typically, we do 2 to 3 observations when we're doing an FBA. Insurances limit us to, sometimes we only have as little as 4 hours. Sometimes it's 8 or 10 hours. In that time, we have to do an interview. We have to do an assessment. We have to actually write the treatment plan and present it to caregivers, all within that time frame that we're given. The codes that we use also limit us to 2 hours per session. So we can't just go out and sit there all day and come up with an FBA. We have to go out multiple days, and we can't stay over 2 hours per session. It's important to communicate with the family throughout. So if you come out and you meet the family and they say, yeah, he's great here, but a lot of times the issues at school, You should be letting them know when you're going out to school, when you went out to school, what it looked like, and just making sure that the parents are involved throughout the process. You also want to make sure that we have that there is some permission to do the assessment, and you're not just um, not going against what the family wants. Um, need to assess the functions of behavior, gather baseline data, and also assess skill deficits as well. So the educational FBA is more geared towards behaviors of concern. When we're doing an FBA, we have to look at problem behaviors. We have to look at skill deficits related to autism, and get baseline data for all that and write a treatment plan and present it. When you're doing an insurance FBA, make sure that you're focusing on the information that you need. If you have a level 1 VB learner, you shouldn't be doing 3 observations at 2 hours apiece to figure out, okay, they don't have any requests that they can make. They don't have any bans. It doesn't take 6 hours of observation to get that information. It'll be apparent very quickly where they're at. And really, for a level 1 learner, you can do an assessment in like an hour. If you have a level 3 learner on the VB map, you should be spending your time probing level 3 skills. You don't want to assess 1,000 or 2,000 tasks to find out exactly everything it is that they know. There will be more time for that later, but you want to get a general idea. So you might pull out 400 advanced words and probe like 20 of them. And for that, and if they get half right, then you can extrapolate that, okay, they probably have more than 500 tasks, but they don't have 750. You also don't want to spend time assessing level 1 skills either. If you are certain, if you have a level 3 learner and they're talking in full sentences, but they have some group and social and some tact skill deficits, then you don't want to be probing out level 1 skills either. If there's an indication that they don't have that, then absolutely probe them out, see where they fall on the VB map or whatever assessment that you're using. But make sure you're spending the time. Your time is limited, so make sure you're spending getting the information that you need to best determine, to best make recommendations. You want to make sure that you're presenting information in a way that the family will understand. Don't read through a treatment plan word for word. So for example, say you should talk like, for this goal, we want her to ask for things that they want more. We do this by having her favorite things. We prompt her in a certain way. And then when she makes a really good request, we give her the item. Instead of saying, we're going to have her manned for 10 more items. And then the parent's just sitting there and they're like, treatment plan components. We need to make sure that we have the client's background, history of treatment, potential barriers. We have to do an FBA of the problem behavior, including baseline data, graphs. We have to have our hypothesis statement in there. We have to do an assessment of skill deficits. For most of the learners that we work with, that would mean a VB map. But there's lots of other, there's PEAK, there's ABLs, AFLs, there's a whole bunch of other assessments out there. We need to make sure then that we're writing treatment plan goals based on what our assessment is. We have to target a replacement behavior. So for our example of Johnny is biting and hitting whenever he doesn't get his way, whenever he's denied access to items. We have to identify a replacement behavior. Okay, instead of hitting and biting, when he's denied access to items, what do we want him to do? Our goals also have to include the setting event. Under what conditions is that new skill going to occur? We have to operationalize the behavior that we're looking to change, and we also need to make sure that we have exit criteria. So for example, for a man's goal, we would have when motivation is present. We don't want them to ask for things when motivation isn't present. So that's our entry criteria. When motivation is present, the client will man for and then we have an exit criteria, 20 novel items. When they've met, when they're able to, when motivation is present and they're able to man for 20 novel items, then that goal has been met. And it's clear to everyone in the team when that goal has been met. We also have to have interventions. Our interventions should always increase a replacement behavior and decrease a target behavior. So if we have, essentially we're doing differential reinforcement for every goal that we have. We have a behavior that we want to decrease and a behavior that we want to increase. So for manding, we have, we want to decrease not asking for things. Doesn't pass the dead person test though, but you know what I mean. And we want to reinforce asking for items. For problem behaviors, we want to decrease the actual problem behavior. So hitting and biting will decrease, and then an appropriate replacement behavior will want to increase. And we need to make sure that we have an intervention for when either of those things happen. So if a client comes up and doesn't engages in a behavior that's not asking for something when they do want something, how are we going to decrease that behavior, and how are we going to increase them asking for behavior? We have to have a crisis plan if necessary, and we have to have our recommendations as to service level and what therapy is going to actually look like. You guys are quiet. Are there any questions or any discussion points here? Melanie and Maria, do you guys have anything to add?
I think you're doing a pretty good job so far.
Yeah, I would say that as well. You're covering everything that we basically do for our assessments. So,
Paige, you've done a few FBAs lately. Do you want to share like what your experience is like trying to get everything complete?
I think the biggest thing to do is to get a really good like interview and get good background information prior to your direct observations. That way you know what you're looking for and you can be better prepared for what type of data you need to collect. I think that that's really helpful. And also just, I know that in the past when taking data for FBAs in a school setting specifically, just making sure that teachers and staff members are aware that you are there specifically and only for data collection, and that you are there only to observe, and that you will not be implementing any interventions or assisting them with interventions or protocols. I think setting that expectation is really important. I've had quite a few staff look at me in the middle of a behavior, and there I am with my timers and writing down notes, and they're like, "Aren't you going to do anything?" And I'm like, "No, it's all on you right now, not yet." So just setting those expectations, I think, is really important.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, again, if you jump in there, then you've skewed the data, and then you can't be you're not sure about your hypothesis then. Yeah, thanks. So from start to finish, let me just throw out like a typical assessment. So we'll get a referral. When we get that referral, we of course we get their insurance information. We get their their reasons for needing ABA therapy. We have to have an evaluation. That evaluation will have a psychological evaluation. We'll have an autism diagnosis. Within that evaluation, it'll have great information such as the reason that they've been diagnosed for social skill deficits, language skill deficits, and automatically reinforcing behavior. everything that's going on that's been a concern to the evaluator, that the reason that they've been diagnosed will be listed there. That information might be brand new. It might be that we're getting a 3-year-old who just got diagnosed and they just had the evaluation done a month ago, and it's all great, pertinent information. It might be that the assessment was done 3 years ago and a lot of things have changed since. No matter what, we're taking that information and we're going to use it to help formulate our hypothesis, but we're going to assume that we're going to be a little bit skeptical of it no matter what. Especially if it's older, we're going to be really skeptical of it. And if it's newer, we're still going to, we're not just going to trust that everything that's been written is accurate. We're going to gather as much other information as we can. We have our a clinical intake that we have our parents complete that asks a whole bunch of questions about problem behaviors and skill deficits. Ask things, what do they want to see out of AByay therapy? We'll review that information before we ever go out and talk to the parents or meet the client. The next step is we have an intake where I'll go out and I'll meet the client, and there's paperwork that I need to go over, consent to treat to make sure that we're good, that they want to do an FBA. I'll answer any questions that they have. I'll just meet the client and get a good sense of what their needs are going to be, as far as who's going to be a good fit for staffing, are they appropriate for our program, stuff like that. And then the BCBA will go out. Typically, and Maria and Melanie, feel free to step in if you do things differently. But generally, our first actual FBA observation is going to be mostly just meeting the client and doing an informal interview of some kind. Basically going out, taking all that information that's been presented and being like, okay, so what are the behaviors of concern? If on paper, on the reports, it says that Johnny hits, and then you go out there and the parent says Johnny hits, then everything's lining up so far, and you want to gear your FBA towards that hitting behavior. But things might not always line up, and you want to make sure that you're always verifying things for yourself. You'll ask questions. Might be like, so I saw that there are some concerns with social skills. Can you tell me what's going on there? Okay, is it just in certain environments? You're trying to dig for details when you're doing that interview to get as much information as you can. After that, it's going to depend on your client. Sometimes you'll, if you have a situation where, and this happens a lot, kids are good at home, have problem behaviors at school. Kids have no behaviors of concern at school, have problem behaviors at home. You're going to want to target the FBA based on what's been reported to you and what you see the concerns are. So let's say we have a 3-year-old who has is in preschool some days and has some problem behaviors at preschool and has some language skill deficits. Then you're going to want to extend that observation at home. Yeah, if you're interviewing the parent, you're probably going to be in the home. The client's probably going to be there. I would spend a little bit of time doing a little bit of assessment, pairing an assessment with that client, and then get as much information that I can from that home setting. And then the next observation would probably be at preschool. And we should be in the informal interview part, getting as much information as we need. Is it Mondays? Is it Wednesdays? Is it a time of day? What's going on at preschool? That's the concerning, and you want to target your observation towards that time. You want to take good FBA data. If there's any specific thing that you want to assess, you can assess it there, and then you can follow up in the home with another. If you have everything you need, great. If you don't, then you can follow up at home with another observation. It does happen sometimes. I would say most of the time doing an informal assessment and then doing observation. If your reports line up, your interview lines up, and your direct observation lines up, that it seems to be access to items is the function, and all of your data points to that. And you've taken data on that and other circumstances, and yep, denied access to items. You're certain that's the function of behavior. Then you're good to start writing a treatment plan. It does happen sometimes that you've got a problem behavior you've observed in several settings, and you haven't seen it. And when that happens, then you could write by report, or you can start manipulating those variables. So typically for us, what that would look like is you're going out to the school and you're observing, and teacher's like, yeah, I don't know. Every other day at math, he tantrums. Today, he didn't tantrum. And then it's like, okay, what other things might happen that would get him to tantrum? And then it's like, okay, can you give him a few more problems and let's see what happens? Can we try this thing and let's see what happens? And specifically setting up the environment to see if you can get for that hypothesized condition based on the reports and the indirect assessment. If you want to really set up the antecedent for there to be a lot of denied access, for there to be a lot of demands to escape from, and then see if you can get that behavior to occur by changing that environment. And then you're moving to more of a functional analysis. But typically in our, what we do, it's typically goes interview, observation, and then functional analysis to really nail down your hypothesis and get good data if you don't have good data. So does anyone, any students have any questions, or does anybody else have anything to add?
Control as a function of behavior.
That's another discussion.
Yeah, that's a whole nother training, Katie.
Let's not be here for another hour, but good point. Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, then this is the end of the training, and you guys are free to go. Make sure you put down 6 to 7:15. We're running a little bit over today for your training time. And that's it. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, friends. Bye.